Thank you to the panel very much for your testimony today. It's been very engaging and very insightful, and I thank the chairman for your statement in response to Senator Young about the committee reviewing the 9/11 AUMF. I think that's really important to do, and I think many of us have been speaking up on that, and I know Senator Young's not here, but I look forward to reviewing his AUMF. Last week I asked Secretary Mattis about the lack of an AUMF in Syria. As you know, in Syria, the U.S. has not been invited in by the government. U.S. military vehicles, heavy artillery, and troops are in Syria, and it's easy to argue that the United States has effectively invaded Syria, violating the sovereignty of a country in the Middle East, which is a de facto declaration of war. Secretary Mattis, who I have great respect for, answered the question that there was really no border between Iraq and Syria, and the United States could not, quote, draw that imaginary line in the midst of an enemy. But he also supported the effort to pass a new AUMF, calling it, quote, a statement of the American people's resolve, unquote. I understand Secretary Mattis's response. ISIS doesn't respect international borders, but ISIS is not the only force in Syria. The Assad government is still the internationally recognized government, and it is being supported heavily by the Russians and the Iranians. I don't think it's right for the U.S. military to become involved in the Syrian civil war based on the 9/11 AUMF. I voted for that AUMF as a House member. I never imagined that vote being used to justify U.S. ground troops in Syria in the year 2017. And I don't think anyone else who voted in favor of it did either. So my questions to the panel, starting with Secretary Albright, is do you think the 9/11 AUMF applies to the situation in Syria? What does this mean, this situation we have now, in terms of the international rules-based order, and are you worried that the conflict could continue to spiral towards a wider conflict that will further entrench the United States in another Middle Eastern war?
I do think that a new AUMF is necessary because one can interpret and reinterpret, but the bottom line is we need the American people to understand what our role is in whatever country. And especially in something that's as complicated as what is going on. And there is a problem between Iraq and Syria and where the border is, but which is exactly the reason why there needs to be more discussion of it. I also think that we need to understand the U.S. needs to be more involved in the political aspects of this, and in fact, understanding where Syria is going, how many things need to be done. And by the way, the Atlantic Council put out a terrific film in terms of what the Russian role has been in terms of breaking Aleppo and in terms of what the Russian role in that has been, and Ambassador Haley, I think, has been terrific in describing that. So there needs to be a larger discussion about what we're doing in Syria, what the future of Syria is, why we need to be there, and an AUMF is the only way to do it. So I think that having kind of followed the discussions on previous issues, there's no question that it's a complex issue in terms of how much power you give to the executive branch, what the duration of it is, what the various component parts of it is, which is exactly the reason why a deliberate discussion and national one needs to be held.
Mr. Hadley?
I think the current AUMF does apply to what's going on in Syria because Al-Qaeda is there and ISIS is a successor organization to Al-Qaeda, so I don't think there's any question about the authority of what we're doing. Also, you know, states have a responsibility to govern their territory and make sure they're not used as a basis for attack of their neighbors, and we know there is plotting going on in Raqqa today directed against Europe and the United States, so we have to defend ourselves against that. So I'm not troubled by that. What I'm troubled by is that if we make ultimately an accommodation with Assad, we send the message to the world that if you're brutal enough with your own people and kill enough of them, the international community will let you stay in power. And I think it's a terrible message to send to the international community.
Yeah. Senator Corker, I would also like to put into the record a New York Times editorial on this called Congress's Duty in the War with ISIS. And it specifically mentions our colleague, Senator Kane, who's been pushing a long time to urge that we address the issue of an AUMF and really constructively look at this issue as a whole, Democrats and Republicans, trying to get what I think you all are urging is a bipartisan foreign policy on these kinds of things. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.